No, but seriously, I really like all those videos of yours I watch from time to time. I really like them. They're so well made.
Yeah, that's all us.
You guys are doing a great job. I'm actually really happy to be a part of it.
Awesome. Thanks for coming.
Oh, don't mention it.
And just like that, we've started recording. With us today is Philipp Garynov. On LinkedIn, it says you're a strategic partnership and business development specialist in the US hospitality and transportation market.
Exactly.
And you currently live in beautiful Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
That's right.
Welcome. We're recording today.
The pleasure is all mine.
Oh, no, absolutely. Mine,
All right, fine.
Actually, the reason we're acting so relaxed is because we're from the same university. And I think the first question will be about just that. MGMO finished?
You had to ask.
What did you major in at MGMO?
At MGIMO, I graduated from the School of International Journalism, the Public Relations Department. In our internal slang, we called it MJSO. Yeah, I graduated in 2007. I think the names have changed a bit now, so modern students might not even recognize it. I think there's still an MJ, but they've added a lot of other stuff. But back in my day, it was public relations in the School of Journalism.
Well, in my time too. I graduated from the exact same school, the exact same department.
No way, really. That's awesome.
It must be fate for real. By the way, did you know there are jokes like that for other universities? For example, for the Minsk Institute of Foreign Languages, it's yes, I does.
Oh, really? No, I had no idea. That's hilarious. Hey, can you send me a link or something where I can read about these? I'm really curious.
Of course. I'll send it to you. I just brought it up recently. It was a tweet from some ancient... With 2015... Oh my god, 2015 is already considered ancient. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, it's just, I try not to think about it, although I do from time to time, but it's just insane, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I graduated a little bit later than you, but it was still a pretty long time ago, so I also don't know what it's called now. Hey, let's ask people in the comments to tell us if anyone knows what all the departments are called now. For those who don't know, MGIMO is the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, University.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, yeah?
Yeah, it's a university that gives you a really good foundation in languages and a very broad worldview because I think, well, for me, and I think for you too, we had so many completely diverse subjects that covered practically the entire world.
Absolutely.
What language did you study?
I studied German. I applied with English, but I studied German.
I studied it as my second foreign language. It was a total disaster.
Yeah? It's awful. But it's a hard language, really hard. I know there are harder languages, but for some reason, German... In school, my second foreign language was French. And it was going really well, actually. And when I was applying to university, I put down two, French and German. And when it came down to it, after I'd already been accepted and everything, we discussed it with my family and decided that I would ultimately choose German. So the second time I had to declare it, I chose German. And it just didn't go very well for me. I mean, I passed it, but well, with a B, to be honest. So it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't perfect either, right? So the state exam and everything, I had my solid B in German, but well, it was a real struggle to get it. And my French became passive. But with French, even now, when I go to French-speaking countries, for some reason I have absolutely no language barrier. Knowing how snobby the French can be and how they hate it when you make even the slightest mistake, I just don't care at all. I'll walk into a pharmacy and say, I have a headache, basically, give me something. Right, and it's fine. It doesn't bother me. And I think that most likely if French had been my primary language, I would have soared with it. But in the end, I have a little bit of German, a little bit of French and English.
So you speak 3 languages?
If you can call it that, yeah.
How does this knowledge of 3 languages assist you specifically in your work?
Well, for me, first and foremost, of course, how can you live in the US without English? Although quite a lot of people get by just fine, but still, basically, if you want to build some kind of life for yourself, it's very difficult without knowing English, obviously. So you can't get anywhere without English, plus it's the international language. And it's really cool that, of course, having lived in the country for almost 10 years, I've picked up a lot of those specific American mannerisms. So, for example, when I'm chatting with Brits or Australians, I can tell it's a bit different. But it helps a lot in any job, in communicating with the whole world, that's for sure. As for French and German, unfortunately, right now, at this stage of my professional career, I don't really need them because they're not really useful to me anywhere. But when I was working more in the tourism component in hospitality, I would periodically have clients or suppliers. I very often we had premium tours for Americans and Canadians to Europe, and we often communicated, obviously, with France, with Germany, with Belgium, and so on and so forth. And sometimes, plus we had Canadians, French Canadians, for example. Then everyone in the company would immediately turn around like, Philip, right? Because, well, Americans aren't great with languages. I would recall everything I could in French and even German, and that's when it more or less helped. Actually, I was just thinking recently that I'd like to, maybe in my free time, as a hobby, pick up one of the languages again, probably French, I'm leaning towards it, and specifically join an in-person group, just to meet some new people, chat, make it a kind of hobby, and, brush up on the language at the same time.
Man, that's so cool. As someone whose hobby is learning languages, I'm a huge fan of that. Learning languages is the best.
It's cool. It really helps broaden your horizons because with the language, you learn the culture.
Yeah,
One can't go without the other, and that's really cool.
that's actually my next question. On your LinkedIn, among other things, it says that you're all about studying cultures, being very culturally correct, with other cultures, cross-cultural interactions, and all that. How did your time at university and the knowledge you gained there influence your work? In what ways does your knowledge of languages assist or support you in this field?
It helped a lot, actually. Well, I've always, honestly, even before getting into MGMO, I have, this story. Everyone in my family went to MGMO. So both my mom and dad graduated from there. My dad's mom and dad graduated, so my grandparents and my mom's dad graduated from there. So for me, basically, for as long as, I don't know, as long as I can remember, MGIMO was always the thing. Not even because it was trendy or something, but like what other option was there? You finish school, you go to MGIMO, right? And I've always, since I was a kid, I traveled a lot. And when I was little, quite little, I was about 10, I lived in Singapore for a year. Because my grandfather was still working there at the time, right? And that's where my basic knowledge of English came from. It's a former British colony, after all. I went to an international school and so on and so forth. And I've always really loved it. Like, I know people have different hobbies. Some people like gardening, right? Some, I don't know, read books, tons of things. I genuinely love to travel and always have. And I remember I had a conversation, I was probably around 18 or 20 with my mom. She said, well, hold on, everyone loves to travel. What's so special? Like, there's nothing to it. And for about 10 years, she kind of made me second guess myself in the sense that I thought, well, yeah, that's logical. I've come up with a pretty lame hobby for myself. But then when I got older and talked to a lot more people, obviously, than when I was 18, I realized that for a lot of people, travel, for some, it's going to Antalya, right? Checking into a hotel and never leaving it. Some people go on cruises here, for example, in the Caribbean and never get off the ship. Some might go and see a couple of sites. Others, on the contrary, travel a ton, but only go to restaurants. They learn about the culture through food and so on. I, more or less, as strange as it may sound, love everything. If I can cover everything in the city, I visit, and definitely try some local food. And I really want to see all the main sites and see how people live. Well, you don't always get to talk to them, but one way or another. So I really, truly love doing it. It's not just that I love to travel. No, I really love to walk everywhere, travel around and see things and so on and so forth. So I think I can now say with confidence that this is really, yes, my hobby, which through my childhood, through university, which was international relations, obviously, it really instilled in me this love for learning about the whole world. And I'm happy to pass it on to others. Many people have told me, my God, the way you talk about certain countries and so on, it makes me really want to go. And as a matter of fact, that's how I ended up moving to America. I came to the conclusion, why don't I try to work in this field?
Time for a short ad break. By the way, if you want to get a tourist visa to the US, or rather, it's not exactly a tourist visa, it's both for tourism and business, if I remember correctly.
B1, B2. A lot of people just call it a tourist visa. Well, in fact, it's like,
It's a tourist or business visa.
yeah, because it's a B1, B2, which is basically both. Like, you might come for negotiations with someone. You're not a tourist, but you're not here to work either. You're here for negotiations.
Anyway, if you want a visa like that, we have a fantastic service that automates the visa application process. We don't guarantee you'll get it, but our service will fill everything out for you, error-free, submit it to the embassy, find appointment slots, and all for a very reasonable price. The links are in the bio and in the description. Go check it out and enjoy.
Travel the world.
You said you moved to America in 2016. Had you been to America before that?
Yes, more than once. well, how should I put it? I was, before that, as a tourist, a real tourist, I was there twice on a tourist visa, and then I had a green card. And I got it in 2013 through my family, meaning my aunt has been living here since the Soviet era, and they got a green card for my father and me through what's called family reunification.
Convenient.
Yes, 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 but it was a big surprise for me. I really didn't know. That's also a long, interesting story. I was already living my life in Moscow, working, and at one point my father calls me up and says, let's go for a business lunch. We met up because we both work downtown. And he says, so here's the thing, our green card is about to come through. I said, what? At that moment, I was probably 26 years old. And that's how it turned out that, yes, they had applied way back at that time, 2001, when I was still just in school. And back then, according to the laws, I was a minor. Basically, they didn't have to inform me about it at all. I didn't have to sign anything. So I knew nothing. And since this process takes a very long time because my father and aunt are brother and sister, that's the longest path when you can apply for family reunification, but you wait in line for more than 10 years. They thought, well, why talk about it now? What's the point? So that was it. They applied and it just dragged on and on and on. And then when the time came and they said it was time to apply, everything started moving quickly. And well, I got involved, also helped my dad gather the documents. Right, way back in 2012, 2013, right? And accordingly, after that, I spent another 2 or 3 years gathering my thoughts, actually, because, well, I can't say I was quite fine at home in Moscow. But at some point, I just decided for myself that, well, it's either now or never. And basically, that's why I really bought a one-way ticket and just went.
Sounds like a fairy tale.
Well, okay. Well, there were difficulties, yes. But it worked out. Yes, it worked out just like that. For me, it was A, a surprise, and B, but I decided myself, yes, because I thought it would be a shame. Many people, well, are really willing to do so much. To give up, both physically and morally, anything. I've met a lot of people here, a lot of migrants who live in a completely different way, so to speak, for this green card. And mine is just sitting in a desk drawer at home, just lying there like that. And I thought that it's better to try and regret, maybe even have to turn back, than to spend the rest of my life regretting it, wondering what would have happened if I had such a chance, And so I don't regret it for a second, even though it was very difficult at times.
Well, I can imagine. Immigration is never the easiest path. I mean, it's like right away you're making your life at least twice as hard.
And you reset basically all your achievements because nobody needs your achievements. When I was moving, I thought, well, okay, I lived in New York at first. And I thought I'd apply for all sorts of positions, like at the UN, international ones, then in Washington, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, well, something like that. Then I thought, well, okay, they might not necessarily know all our universities, but it's clear that most diplomats and international officials from Russia come from MGIMO. So in that kind of narrow funnel of institutions, people should know MGIMO, plus I speak English, and plus I have all the documents. No. There's a restaurant. You can work part-time as a busser, the one who clears the crumbs, and that's where you should go. And me, with all my experience and knowledge, I didn't actually go there, but, in essence, it was close to that, at least in my experience.
So you mean you already had a career in Moscow?
Yes, in full swing, absolutely. I worked in the presidential administration and then I worked in the government office. Yes.
Well, yeah, that's quite a leap. Okay, all right. So you moved in 2013. You moved and you were kind of brought back down to earth by the new reality.
In 16. I moved in 16. I started the process in 13. I got the green card in 13 and started traveling back and forth because you have to maintain it. So after that, I visited America another 4 or 5 times before I actually moved. Yes, on the green card. That's actually what I started this story with, about the green card. And it's interesting, by the way, when I traveled to America under a different, status, and then on the green card, I saw it in a completely different way. I mean, when you travel on a tourist visa, you basically know that, well, you only have a tourist visa and that's it. But when you have a green card, you're walking around the same New York and you just see everything differently somehow. Although there's still that wow effect, but still in reality, everything looks a bit different.
So you were brought back down to earth a bit. And what did you decide to do?
So basically, that's what happened. I arrived and pretty quickly, I moved from my aunt's place to New York, to the city itself, because she lives in New Jersey near New York. So I started looking for a job and basically I started applying for all those as I thought. You're always living in your own thoughts, which have very little to do with reality. So I'll apply to the UN, I'll apply here and there. And when I didn't get any responses at all. And in America, it's interesting. The way it's set up is that you get a response, even if they're interested in you. In Russia, I remember very well, you apply, and if you don't hear back in a few days, you just apply somewhere else, right? Here, it can be the other way around. They might get back to you in 2 or 3 months. Well, at least that's often the case. People told me about it, and in my own experience. Again, I'm sure there are different stories, but that's how it was for me. And in fact, the UN did end up writing to me about 3 months later when I had already found another job. It was like, well, you can come in now. Right. But there were also very long and complicated processes. Like when you apply, there's this whole huge separate website, for example, for the UN, where you fill out tons and tons of documents, submit all these cover letters and so on. So anyway, I was looking for that kind of job. Obviously, I wasn't planning on going to some restaurant to sweep the floors. I mean, seriously, because someone might say, well, what kind of snobbery is that? You come here, you start from scratch. Yes, I agree, but I wasn't running from some war in 2016, so to speak, not from anything. I mean, like, I just moved, right? And I had a different standard and so on. I had all the documents and I thought, well, in the end, if not, I can always pack my things and go back.
Right.
And it was like, well, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But of course, I still wanted it to work because you're kind of setting a challenge for yourself, You just moved. Are you just going to pack up and give up right away? Right. And of course, you don't want to go work in a restaurant either. Anyway, in New York, I ran around a bit, looked for different jobs. And in the end, this is also a separate funny story. I sat down with myself and I thought, okay, right. Of course, it was very hard because I found myself in a big city that I knew pretty well, but I was completely alone in it. Because, when you live there, it's a completely different story. It's a good thing I arrived just before summer, so at least everything was blooming, it was warm, nice, sunny, because winter in New York is not fun at all. And even though that lifted my spirits, I would go running in Central Park. It would seem, my God, the dream came true. I'd run out of my house, run through Central Park like all Americans, back and forth, jogging, right? But in reality, it was very lonely, very. Because you're alone, you can only connect by phone and so on, with your relatives, chat, but it's still not the same. And I, for the most part, led a very social lifestyle in Moscow. I had a lot of friends and constant travel and work and this and that and family. And here it's like, bam, you're in a vacuum. I remember I sat down with myself in my apartment one day and had a talk. Okay, what do you really want? I thought, well, since you're so miserable here right now, what do you want in principle? And so I started to honestly figure things out with myself, what I loved about this place, what I wanted here. And that's when all the tourism and all the travel kind of surfaced, because what I was doing back in Russia was something completely different. I mean, for example, I wrote speeches for top state officials, which were in the humanitarian field, of course, but it's a completely different field, not tourism at all. Again, why I never wanted to get into tourism in Russia is because for me, the association, the tourism industry in Russia was selling last-minute tours to Antalya for $300 in some shady basement, roughly speaking.
Well, that's partly true.
As it turned out, actually, a little spoiler here, it's pretty much the same in America. Not exactly, but similar. But still, it's a bit different. Obviously, there's a bigger market, so to speak. But in reality, yes, and I sat down, had an honest talk with myself, and there were a couple of professions that I thought to myself, okay, you're in a new country, so let's give it a try. Why be afraid of tourism now? You love it after all. So let's try. And so I started applying, for jobs at all these different big tourism companies. Like I applied to Booking.com and to Expedia, the monsters of the industry. Again, no replies, nothing. And then at some point, I'm watching the news, Russian news actually, and they were talking about how they had finally opened another representative office in Beijing. Like that soft power thing when a country opens its tourism offices. For example, Visit Russia or something like that to, promote Russia. Or, different countries do that to promote themselves as a tourist destination, as a cultural and tourist destination. And this one was in Beijing. So I started Googling, found the federal agency that handles this, found the specific department that handles it. Right? And I saw that at that time they had offices open. Again, this was in 2016, right? A completely different life. And they had offices in Helsinki, in Berlin. They had just opened in Beijing and somewhere else, I think, in the Middle East, like in the Emirates, something like that. Then I'm thinking, how interesting. Americans travel to Russia a lot. I think they were in the top 3, actually. So why isn't there an office like that, in America? And so I started writing directly to this agency and so on, and it was called Visit Russia. Like, hey guys, I'm here, I'm ready to help. I can write a plan for how we can open, how we'll do this, that, and the other thing, and so on. Well, naturally, it all just went into a void. Apparently, nobody cared. I even called them, tried to talk to the head of the department or whatever it was. But at some point, while I was searching for all this, I stumbled upon a website called Travel Russia also. And I thought it was also theirs. The only thing that confused me was that they were selling tour packages right away. I thought, wow, these guys are clever, damn. They're already selling packages right away. And I just sent an email there to something like an info address, let's say, a general one. And it was one of those classic situations. I wrote it and forgot about it. And then suddenly, 3 or 4 days later, I get an email saying, Philipp, we were very interested in your letter and so on. Would you like to talk to us? But as it later turned out, it was a major travel company that initially started out offering trips, specifically VIP trips, to Russia, but then they eventually expanded to all of Europe and they created customized programs, not just, random tours, some kind of strange package deals. Instead, you could really, a person could say, okay, I want to go here, and then there. And you would put it all together, make it look nice. In short, it was cool. And we talked with them once, we talked twice, we talked 3 times, and they said, okay, we'll take you. The only thing is we're located in Fort Lauderdale. Are you ready to move? And by that point, having lived in New York for almost half a year, I was so fed up with it. I absolutely didn't want to stay there at all. And it's not like I had any special prospects there. But here was Fort Lauderdale, which is roughly speaking Miami. In fact, it's 40 minutes and you're in Miami. And I'm thinking, well, what the heck? It's not like it's Kansas or something. So why not? I can do it. Because it's clear that if it had been someplace like Kansas or Iowa or something, I probably wouldn't have even gone. And then I thought, why not? So I packed my things and, well, that's how I moved there. Here. Right? And I ended up here. And I worked at that company until the pandemic and I grew there. At first I started obviously small, just stupidly putting together and selling tours myself. Then I was training others, then, I was leading a team and so on. And there were several offices around the world. Our American one was considered the headquarters, but in reality it was the smallest one because obviously labor in America is the most expensive. And the main offices were in Eastern Europe, where I often, again, traveled for business trips, which I really liked because from there I could constantly go to Moscow and meet my relatives. In short, I got a pretty sweet setup.
Yeah, I get it. Well, actually, that story about writing and forgetting and then they hire you, I'm really not hearing that for the first time. It feels like that's how everyone's career is built, I think.
It's amazing because with the UN, you're waiting every day, waiting for them to write, Nobody writes. But here I just wrote and I even forgot about them. When I got the email, I spent about 5 minutes trying to remember who, what, why they were even writing to me. And the UN wrote later. By the way, these guys had already hired me, sent me a job offer, and said, hey, would you like to fly out for a training? At that time, they had a big office in Vilnius. Do you have a Schengen visa? I said, yes, I do. I happen to have one. Right before I left, it's amazing how everything lines up. Before flying to America, you'd think, well, why would you need a Schengen visa, right? With a green card, you still need to get visas, of course, for all the countries that are close to Russians, let's say. And, well, it's not a visa-free regime. And I just did it just in case. I thought, well, let me have it stamped in my passport. Even though you could say you're immigrating to the US from Russia, why would you even think about a visa for Europe? But I thought, let me just have it, because that process was familiar and clear to me in Russia. I get it stamped, and 6 months later they ask me, do you have a Schengen? Can you go to Lithuania for a training? I say, I do, amazingly. And that's how because if I hadn't done it, I wouldn't have had it. And I wouldn't have had the time to get it, and that's it. And so I already have a job offer, and the tickets are bought, and an apartment is rented for me and everything, and I'm basically flying almost home, you could say. And it felt so nice for a month and in the summer, so it was just awesome. And then finally, the UN writes to me, well, hello, please come for an interview in the language lab. And you, as an MGIMO graduate, when I heard the word language lab, I started twitching all over. My eyes started twitching. I was like, no, guys, what? Thank you, no need. So, that was it. I didn't go to the UN.
I didn't go to the UN either, by the way. But I didn't go. I was supposed to be a volunteer in Istanbul. My story was a little different. I was, in short, very disappointed in a relationship. I broke up we were with a guy for 10 years. And I was like, I'm leaving. What? Nothing's holding me here anyway. I'm leaving. And I started applying for absolutely everything at the UN that had communications in the title, that was for ages 18 to 30, and where the languages were like Spanish and English. Somehow Istanbul got in there. And they just literally, they were like, you're on the shortlist. You can't back out now. But by that point, well, it had been. They'd been stringing me along for about 3 months too. I'd already forgotten that I'd even applied for that Istanbul position. I, of course, wanted to go to the UN in New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were like, that's it. You're on the short list. Let's do this. You know, you have every chance to go on this 2-year volunteer program. For context, these volunteer programs are also paid. So besides covering all your expenses for flights, settling in, and all that, they also pay you on top of it. Of course, they don't pay you like in American corporations, but you get a little something.
So there's some kind of office in Istanbul, a UN representative office?
Well, I understood that, yes.
Uh-huh, uh-huh,
I think it was UNICEF's.
uh-huh. Well, something from the UN organizations.
Yeah. Right. And they were like, okay, let's do it. But my life had already gotten back on track.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't really feel like it anymore. I was there. And I immediately said, I've accepted another job offer and all that. I'm not planning on going anywhere anymore. But in reality, it was just, my life was sorted. I'd found an amazing apartment in Moscow. I had amazing support from my friends. I had a new boyfriend. Everything was just great. And they were like, but you can't refuse? And I was like, I can't block.
So, listen, here's the conclusion. Why do they take so long to reply?
I don't know. They just can't.
I mean, come on, 3 months. Listen, people's circumstances change. Well, it's like, like all big corporations, when they say we're so great, it's a whole step forward for you, right, to work for us. Well, for some people, maybe yes, but for others, maybe not.
Yeah.
I already had tickets and everything set for Europe and then relocation to Miami. So why should I drop everything and go to some random interview at the UN? What for?
And into a language lab, no less.
Yeah.
Actually, for context, a language lab is where they torture MGIMO students for hours, making them listen and repeat. Basically the speech of the language you're learning. So in this case, yours was German, mine was Spanish and German, and we both had English, of course.
Well, let me see.
Right. And it's awful.
You sit there with those big Cheburashka headphones listening.
Yeah, with huge headphones, and you sit there really. There are photos, for example, from my student days, photos of me sitting there with such a sad face, as if, I don't know, I hadn't eaten for 3 days and wasn't going to anytime soon.
Yeah, it was disgusting, actually. Listening, then retelling what you heard. All in all, it's a pretty dreary activity, to be honest.
And honestly, it's stupid. I wouldn't say it wasn't beneficial.
You're listening to speech, right? But the stuff they played for us was very classical, meaning they'd play, well, it's a well-known story, may Gimo forgive me, that they teach us how to say things like Angela Merkel has arrived on an official visit, blah, 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 sanctions have been imposed. And then when I was actually in Berlin, I wanted to ask, excuse me, in which department are the sweaters sold? I just didn't even know the word for department. I was like, oh, come on.
Yeah, it's the same for me. I know how to say to show favor towards the left-wing opposition in Spanish, or, I don't know, uranium enrichment. But for the longest time, I didn't know the word for power outlet.
Right, yes, absolutely, exactly like that. So the language lab, well, it's not all that.
So, what happened after Vilnius? Come on, tell us.
After Vilnius. Oh, this is funny. I'll just tell you. I remember, so when all this happened, they told me, okay, that's it. We want you so badly, so come on over, come on over. And now we're also going to take you to Vilnius and all that. And I remember we're discussing all this with my aunt, and, well, my aunt is listening, and she goes, maybe this is the CIA, huh? Because it's so strange. They wanted you so badly because you have all this experience. And, well, at some point I started to back off a little because I was also, and they were like, no, we've rented an apartment. We've got the tickets, basically, just fly over. And she's like, maybe it's, and my uncle comes in and says, that's great. Their benefits package is this big. He says, so just go. I was like, damn. But no, it turned out it wasn't the CIA.
I love this story so much.
Yeah. It was hilarious. So maybe it's the CIA? I mean, they wanted you so badly.
That's great.
Well, anyway, I went, but yeah, in the end, I didn't get any benefits package from the CIA. So I went to Vilnius, learned all about these tours and so on. The people there, by the way, are really great. They're very, very digital friendly. They have all their processes set up amazingly well, seriously, even to this day. If anyone from there ever sees this, the company is called Firebird Tours. just fantastic. That was my first American work experience. And to this day, in terms of how their work processes are set up, they're just great, very efficient, very cool. Even back then, they were using Salesforce and it was very user friendly. So yeah, it was great. They teach you both the internal, protocol for how everything works, and of course, everything about all the tours and so on, how it's all done, how it's presented to the client and sales in general, sales techniques and all that. It was cool. Right. And in that area, I had no experience. Like I'd never actually worked in tourism. But I loved all that stuff. I was great at talking about different countries, about all the, travel, about cities, all of it. Because of course, Americans could call and say, look, I have 5 days for a vacation. Americans have very short vacations, by the way. A lot of people, by the way, prefer not to talk about that, or they just don't know. Here, there's no real concept of vacation time in the sense that there's no federal, how do I put it, law, right, about minimum vacation days. On average, it's just kind of established that you get 2 weeks a year, on average. But I knew people who were only given 1 week at first. If you already have 3 or 4 weeks, that's considered really great. I mean, it's clear that big companies like Google or whatever, they give 5 weeks, and that's why they're called such great. But that's all just based on what you negotiate. There's no rule that the government forces everyone to give you, say, 28 days, like in Russia, or for example, in Belgium, I think it's 6 weeks. So there's nothing like that here. So Americans have very short vacations, and they would call me and say, we're really interested. We have 5 or 6 days, a week at most. We want to travel the Trans-Siberian Railway. And I'm like, well, you're not going to be able to do that? Not at all. Not at all. Even if you just get on and ride the whole way, you'll still be traveling for your entire vacation. So that kind of thing. I had to, guide them a little, show them where to go, what to do, and how. And I loved all that. But the sales process, working with Salesforce and so on, was set up incredibly well. But I learned all of it, and then I moved back, packed my things in New York, and flew here to Miami, and started my life. Actually, this year, in August, it was 9 years that I've been living in South Florida, right? And basically, I worked there wonderfully until the pandemic. I mean, I was growing constantly. Well, I traveled to Europe about once or even twice a year. They had their main office in Vilnius, then they opened one in Minsk, and I traveled to both. And from Minsk to Moscow, it's nothing, just a quick hop. So,
Right.
and so basically, that's how I got into this hospitality business before the pandemic, which ruined everyone's plans.
Yes, that was my next question. What about the pandemic? How did you survive?
Well, we all survived as best we could, as they say. So here's what happened with me. When everything started to collapse, I was actually in Minsk back in January, February. The first rumors started about some nonsense. China, some kind of virus. But everyone was like, yeah, it's nothing, it's nothing. Then I flew back here in February, and in February, I was still selling tours like crazy. Americans in general, in that sense, they're like on one hand very skittish, but on the other hand, until it hits them personally, they don't care at all. By the end of February in Italy, it was already a total disaster in the north. They were closing all these cities and so on. And here we were, the people were calling me saying, hey, how are things with you? How's it going? I'd say, everything's fine. People are buying summer tours like crazy. For real. But then suddenly around the beginning of March, when cases started appearing here too, they of course started to get nervous. I remember I realized things were bad when on some Monday after a weekend, I went downstairs in my building. We have a gym downstairs in the building. And I pull on the door to go in, and there's already a sign on it that the gym is closed until further notice, as they say here, meaning until the next steps are taken. And I realized, oh my God, now it's reached me, my own home. And then there were announcements that there was the first case of coronavirus in our building. So long story short, and that was it. And literally in early March, I was still on the phone selling, helping, communicating with our offices and so on. And at the end of March, they basically sent us all packing on unpaid leave, let's say.
Right.
So that wasn't very cool, but obviously there were A, savings, and B, I have to admit, honestly, America helped out quite a bit during the pandemic. I mean, all those stimulus checks that came, the unemployment benefits they opened up, because unemployment here is also a complete mess, really. The whole system basically pushes you to not take it under any circumstances, especially in Republican states, which is exactly what Florida is. For example, with unemployment, you get on average, I think, $1,000 a month. $1,000 a month when a standard apartment costs $2,000 to rent. And to get it, you have to report every week that you've applied to 5 jobs. So it's, well, essentially it's useless and not worth the trouble. Because you'd spend more time collecting all those documents and it's not even clear what you'd spend that money on. So basically, unemployment here is terrible. It's not Europe. But during the pandemic, they waived all of that. You could just click on, well, at this special agency, okay. And the federal government was also paying extra, so some pretty good money was coming in. Plus, they reduced rent and so on and so forth. So basically, it turned out okay. And for a while, I actually relaxed a bit because, as I said, I had my own savings and so on. And probably for the first year, I lived even too well. I went to Russia a couple of times for a long time. I mean, before that, with my vacation time, well, I had 3 weeks, which was better than what others had. I had a 3-week vacation at my first job, right? But I could only fly for like 10 days. But here I was flying for 2 or 3 months at a time, right? And I got to see my relatives and so on and so forth. And plus money was coming in, so I relaxed a bit. Well, because honestly, we had been working a lot and I was very, very tired. So I thought, let me live for myself a little, right? And the pandemic, especially since I love tourism so much, where was there to go back to? I mean, it was, well, just useless.
Right.
But then, somewhere in 2021, in the second half, it became clear that this was all ending. And it was time to start doing something, gradually return to tourism. There was no tourism yet, and then just completely by chance, through a classmate here, a job in aviation came up, and they're involved in the sale and purchase of aircraft parts.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it could be engines. I mean, it could be anything at all. And they cost $1 million, $2 million. It's a huge world of its own, as it turns out. I got into this industry for a very short time, just for a few months, spoiler alert. It's a serious business. For those who are interested, it's very interesting. But it was so not for me. Because I was also in sales there, essentially, right? But all these aircraft parts, it's a whole other world. You have to dive really deep into it. In fact, the way everything is double-checked in aircraft manufacturing, it really makes, this particular mode of transport actually quite safe, right? Knock on wood. But seriously, when you think about it, it's reassuring, isn't it? I mean, to such an extent that no cars, no trains, nothing, no steamships even come close. I mean, every single part, including every screw, has to have a history of where it came from, where it was repaired, and where it was physically located going back many years. So it's very serious there. But it was so not for me, even though it seemed like sales. But I realized that's it. And by that time, the whole tourism thing was starting to revive. 2022, 2023. And basically, that's it. I left there pretty quickly too. And right from the beginning of 2023, I went back to tourism. It was corporate tourism. An interesting company, a Franco-American one. It was completely different. If in my previous company, it was more B2C. I mean, I was communicating with clients. Then this one was more B2B. So you were doing tourism for people who were professionals in the industry themselves. So you can't just give them a pretty story. Money is also a very important factor, meaning you have to offer your package for less money than they could put it together themselves because they are professionals. That was also very interesting. So how long did I work there? Well, almost a year. And then an offer came up from the company where I work now because it was much more interesting. And it's kind of a related field because honestly, at some point, I got tired of working for commission. Because no matter what you do in tourism, almost always, well, one way or another, even if you're not just some random salesperson, you still basically depend on the numbers. Like how much your team made, right? So it doesn't matter. You're always climbing this pyramid, but still, a lot depends on the commission. And plus, for example, in that company, the work processes were terribly set up, really, just awful. I came in with my previous background and I said, guys, I made a huge presentation, in my free time, and said, let's make some changes. For example, they had a CRM that they didn't use at all. Or rather, whoever wanted to use it, used it, and whoever didn't. And everyone did their own thing, so there was no protocol, nothing at all. And when I tried to get into those OGN stables and try to clean them up, I said, you hired me because I was going to share this experience of mine with you. I realized that nobody needed it. They told me, you're great, but look, here are the clients. See, you need to call them. I was like, I get it. I got your message. So, and naturally, I started looking for other options. And then this opportunity came up. The job I have now, because next year, the World Cup will be held in the United States, Mexico, and Canada, just like it was in Russia in 2018. It's also quite amazing how things happen. So when I worked in aviation, it was my school that helped, and here it was the university. DMGMO, yes. And completely by chance, I mean, we all chat on Instagram, and suddenly I think I was in Italy on vacation at that moment, and suddenly my classmate writes to me. He writes, "Oh, hey, are you in Florida? Because I just got here," and so on and so on. So we start talking, and it turns out he has his own company. They organize transportation for World Cups and for all major sporting events. Transportation for different client groups, as it happens, both national teams and other teams, and so on, right down to the fans. There are many different things, but it's essentially a lot of people for very large, major international sporting events. He says, "Listen, let's meet up, this and that." And I was looking for a job at that time. I mean, I was working at my job, but I had already, well, I figured them out pretty quickly. And so accordingly, we started talking, chatting, and I told him about my experience. And he says, "Listen, we're actually looking for people. We're building a team now because the World Cup is coming up in 2.5 years, and we need to communicate with clients, potential transport suppliers, and so on." I say, "Listen, I have a lot of experience communicating with all these companies inside the US, and I know how to do all this. And in general, I know very well how it all works here, because now everything works differently, really. Similar, but different. This is also something like that, yes." Well, we discussed all the details, and in general, I ended up going to them at the beginning of 24.
Damn, cool. So do you like it?
Yes. It's very interesting because there's more freedom here in the sense that there's a huge project, yes, and it's clear that we all help each other. But in general, it's more or less about finding suppliers, choosing good ones, conducting a dialogue with them, signing all these contracts and so on, communicating with clients, going to check them all out. And accordingly, all 3 countries. So I've already been to Mexico several times. I've already been to Canada several times. And well, all this sounds cool, but it's work. That is, you just fly. And we all fly. In fact, it's a lot of work because there is usually not just one supplier in the city, but several of them you need to meet, see what kind of fleet they have, what it all looks like, and so on. And then these contracts have to be concluded, signed, a bunch of everything. But this, as strange as it sounds, is a creative process in its own way, creative, well, and it's very interesting. And well, at the same time, it's still associated with travel, with traveling, well, like, and seeing other countries.
In short, you're in your place.
Well, generally speaking, yes. No, it's really, really cool, really great. And still work with your people. Whatever you say, yes, it's actually really cool because we've known each other since we were 17. What is there to say? But at the same time, everything is absolutely natural. Work is work. And this is a serious project that needs to be, as we say, delivered.
Undeniably worthy.
That's exactly why you work so much. What we discussed at the beginning was that we only get to chat normally on weekends.
Well, yes. Oh, well,
Well, yes.
it's time for integration. If you suddenly find yourself wanting to attend and experience the World Cup in 2026, then it's definitely time to apply for visas, guys. To do this, you can use our platform, which automates visa applications, all in one window. Everything is very simple and without any errors that people unfortunately can allow it. Follow the link in the profile or description. Let's get back to our conversation.
Yes.
I understand that it's probably too early to ask this question, but you are also happy where you are now, but what would you like to do in the future? Sorry, we don't have an interview, but still. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
This is generally, yes, this is a question that is interesting, by the way. Well, I ask myself that question sometimes too, a couple of times a year. And it's amazing how your own vision is constantly changing. I mean, if you'd asked me 5 years ago about the next 5 years, I would have said anything but this, right? So it's always a bit difficult to answer. So what I say now doesn't mean that, my thoughts will be the same in 5 years. But generally, ideally, of course, I guess I like this field, and I still like my tourism and so on, everything related to transporting people, moving people around the world, across borders, through different states, whether it's in Russia, through different regions and so on, communicating with people and so on. And of course, I'd probably like a bit more freedom, but only having your own business gives you that freedom, that conditional freedom. Because here, you're your own boss. On one hand, you have all the responsibility, which of course is incredibly difficult. But on the other hand, You can also choose your own time a little. If you can competently set up all the processes, then in principle, you get a bit more freedom later on. It all sounds very nice in theory. Of course, it's not quite like that, right? But still. So that's why I'd probably like to stay somewhere in the same field. By the way, I sometimes think about starting a blog and maybe telling people things. I haven't fully formed the idea in my head yet. Because obviously there are a billion of such blogs all over the world in all languages. But sometimes you listen to some of them and think, good Lord, people, what are you even talking about? What are you saying? So I always try, maybe because I'm a Libra, I don't 100% believe in it, but still, I like for everything to be in some kind of balance, in equilibrium. Plus our linguistic education, so I still try to talk about things. I understand that it's how I see it, but at least in a more or less balanced way. Because sometimes you listen to people who travel or try to talk about a country, well, especially about the same states that I know, and you think, oh, what a nightmare, and they have 1 million subscribers. You think, well, if they can do it, then what's the big deal about talking about such things? So maybe I could somehow combine everything, this and that, and do something similar of my own. It's hard to say. I can tell you honestly, I'd probably like, yes, as I said, to have a bit more freedom, maybe something of my own or working for myself, but in the same field. Although, again, project-based work, like what I'm doing now, because, for example, now it's the 2026 World Cup. Then in 2028, there will be the Olympics in Los Angeles. Oh, right. And again, we're also planning to participate in it. So there you go. Why not, right? So it's like, essentially, it just keeps flowing from one thing to another, from one to another. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. There's no clear answer, but as I said, I'd probably drift towards something of my own in the end, maybe completely my own, armed with my own experience and possibly some connections, friendships, and so on. I've been pretty good at that so far. And to grow in that direction somehow, and perhaps even getting involved in some blogging activities. Because in general, it seems to me that this is the future in our field.
Well, yes. Because travel is best sold through travel experiences are best sold and marketed through visuals.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much for this simply amazing conversation. It was very concentrated and very interesting. In fact, it's simply a truly genuine pleasure to talk with such a guest. Who knows what to say? To me,
All this is inconvenient.
yes, in general, thank you very much. Good luck with your blog, with your case. If you need help, call us.
With pleasure. Well, that's why. We've already established contacts. I'm all for it. The connection has been established. Yes, yes, yes. That's it. The channel is set up.
Yes. Anyway, thank you very much. Good luck in everything. And I would like to say, please subscribe because this is truly the best thank you that you can give us for the content we create. Follow the links in the description below and like this episode. Be sure to share it with your friends if you want to help us. If you don't want to, share too.
Here.
So ultimatum. That's it. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.